Hi, this is Irving Steele, and here we are on Local Issues today. We're very lucky to have a special guest, Dr. Christopher Clouet. He is a leader in educational areas as well as the community and an all-around great person. So great to have you here, Dr. Clouet.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Of course, and with everything going on right now with, I guess, 2 years into the pandemic and what we're seeing with education, I'm sure you hear from friends and colleagues all the time, it's a tough time, I imagine.
It is. It's very challenging for school districts, but for students, my primary focus, students and their families. There's so much going on, and I think schools have handled it pretty well overall. I know there are the complainers, and I respect the fact that you can have differences of opinion, but I think health is something that we'd all agree is crucial. So, my concern is that students and their learning have been interrupted, and how we get students to re-engage in the process of learning, and that means seeing themselves as someone who has agency and capacity to learn and develop themselves.
And you mentioned health. That's a critical spot, both for the students as you focus on their education, also the teachers.
Yes.
If the teachers aren't healthy, how are they able to educate the students?
Right. And we've been very fortunate in Connecticut. I think we have not seen huge outbreaks of COVID among students or among teachers. And so I think we've handled it well. And as some of the viewers may know, my wife is a nurse, and she has been working as a school nurse. So she's right there on the front lines of this and helps inform me with science.
That's great. And I think one thing too, we can always focus, there's a plethora of problems always on everything, especially education. And one thing that really stands out about you, I think, is, you obviously you notice the problem, but you come up with a creative solution. And I'm sure over the last couple of years, whether it's in higher education or other levels, you've started to come up with some different ideas that you hope to put into action.
Well, I do think the pandemic forces us to reevaluate what we mean by school or schooling. And I am of the generation where we marched off to kindergarten and went through grade after grade and went through, and I enjoyed it, and people that are educators oftentimes were good at school, and so I felt comfortable in that environment and was able to be successful there, so felt comfortable. But not all students are. And so that's one of the challenges. But I think this pandemic, and also just the global changes going on, not the least of which are going on in Eastern Europe right now, but economically as well as culturally, and certainly issues of climate change and all of those things together are changing the world, which means we need to change how we organize education, which could mean that instead of just coming in every day, Monday through Friday, maybe there's different ways to do it. Now, we'd need to provide adequate childcare. Education is not childcare, but we need to provide childcare so that parents could work. So this has to be really thought out very well. But some kids did actually enjoy working online. Some kids and I interviewed lots of kids about these issues. Most kids preferred to be in person with their friends, and that's appropriate. But there are lots of ways to do that, and that might change the way we look at schooling as opposed to what many of your viewers have experienced in their own lives.
And I think that's exactly right, that the traditional makeup of, hey, you have to have these certain level classes, you have to have this to pass on to the next grade or next level. Maybe that's kind of in the midst of changing right now.
It's a slow change. That would be an understatement, a very slow change. Education, as we know it, has been criticized by many for being so traditionalist, right? So the way we organize high schools today in the United States comes from a meeting called the Committee of 10. I won't overdo this, but the Committee of 10 at Harvard in the 1890s came up with a way to organize high schools, and that's how we still do it today. And so maybe at the time it made sense, but I think it's time for us to at least revisit that. The way we have our grading system comes out of Prussia and Germany. That at the time, in the early 19th century, that probably made sense. And of course, the famous American educator Horace Mann went to Prussia and Germany on his honeymoon and visited some schools and came back, and that became the American model. Well, again, maybe it's time for us to look at how we view time and how we measure learning, because it's much more than just taking a quiz and getting a report card. It's much more about deep learning that actually influences one's life and helps people to become creative and productive.
Definitely. I like how you say mention of how we measure the learning and then also how we value the learning as well. That I'm relatively new to education compared to you, but my experience at the local college here and public schools is that we need so much more support, I feel, for educators, for schools, that maybe we just don't value them enough as a society. Can you speak to that at all?
I think, unfortunately, I think you're right, that as a society we do not value young people in general, and therefore we don't value schooling the way we ought to. In many countries that are more successful than we are, at least in terms of educating a higher percentage of their population of young people at a higher level, it's because teachers are held in high regard by the society, and children are held in high regard as someone that's important for the future. And I like to say that the future is an intergenerational project, and part of that intergenerational project includes teachers and students.
Yeah, and you think about it, if the students are at school maybe a few hours, 7 hours a day for public schools growing up, that there's a lot outside of the school that we need to consider to provide the foundation they need to actually learn and to have success.
Right.
And the schools, I think, can only do so much, but to your point, maybe we can find different ways to have educational curriculum and classes and things that really engage them. And I think that you were touching on some things. You mentioned maybe some with design thinking and harnessing creativity. Maybe you could share a little bit about that?
Absolutely, because design thinking is something that you can use in any line of work. So we oftentimes think of it as something related to engineering or maybe even the creative arts. But it can be part of designing anything, including lessons and units of lessons. And so one might say you start with the goal in mind and then work backwards from there.
Who said that? Stephen Covey?
Yeah, he's among the many. Yeah,
many.
I like the Jay McTighe version of it, but there are many certainly. The top engineering schools, Stanford School of Design is one of them, that they look at this and they include education in their portfolio of thinking about these issues. But I do think that we need to make sure that we are alerting our students at a young age to some of the emergent fields that are developing, because so many people are still looking backwards, and that doesn't really help us prepare children for the future. Right? So emerging fields that, like CRISPR technology is a field that, unless you're introduced to it as a child, you might not know that it's something that you might actually have the skill set to work on, in addition to all kinds of digital tools. And even things as far afield as farming, new farming technologies that, vertical farming and that sort of thing. I mean, these things are, if we introduce children to them, they might say, hey, I've got an idea. I've got a better idea for growing food in the middle of cities that doesn't use too much water. Let's work on that together, and let's encourage kids to do that.
Definitely. And you think if you're learning about biology and chemistry and nanotechnology, all these things, through vertical farming, that could be really fun.
Yes. So that's oftentimes called project-based learning. So when you're working on a project, you then might need to learn some skills to accomplish what you're trying to do in the context of your project. And that's much more meaningful, right? If you just get a lecture on calculus, it might not be that interesting. If you need to solve some problems to accomplish a goal, and it requires understanding math at that level, then the student leans in and says, well, this is something I need, and now I'm willing to pay more attention.
And I know traditionally that we really like to have well-rounded students, that they try all these different subjects and focus in more and more. But at the same time, if someone shows great aptitude for a certain area, why not support them and let them really run with it?
Yeah, and that's a philosophy that comes out of the 19th century as well. When you think of the work of Maria Montessori, for instance, in Italy, or the Reggio Emilia techniques, which are similar but different from Montessori, they certainly are learner-based. Learners construct their knowledge. They don't just. Paulo Freire from Brazil oftentimes talks about the banker's model of education. We don't just open the heads of children and pour information in. That's what a lot of people think happens. You just sit there, you learn it, and now you know it. Well, no, not necessarily. You may even learn it a little bit and pass the quiz or pass the test. Many people have had that experience, right? They took French, they passed the French test. Now, can they speak French? No, they cannot, right? Because they learned it for just that particular purpose. Whereas if you, instead of the banker's model, if you look at children constructing knowledge through projects and through their own curiosity, and there is a balance, because then the adults have to say, well, we do need you to learn certain things, and we do need you to have a sense of the history of our country, for instance, would be an example. Certainly literacy is an example, but literacy now means so many more things. We used to think of literacy as just your ABCs and reading some of the classics. Now literacy is so expanded to mean you know, mathematical literacy, scientific literacy. You know, don't we want the children of today to become the voters of tomorrow, even if they're not scientists themselves, but that can make good decisions when voting on certain things? Like, should we use CRISPR technology to make, you know, people all 7 feet tall and, you know, live to, you know, that people should be knowledgeable about what that means and what the implications are, and have some, have the ability to discern what's important information, and have an ethical foundation when making those decisions. That's a lot, right? but we can do it if we organize schools more effectively.
And I wonder how we can actually organize them. That's a great point you bring up, that just yesterday I was reading in the Hartford Current that the head of the Connecticut Education Association, the largest union in the state, was saying there's this great resignation of teachers around the state.
Yeah.
And so as we organize these schools moving forward, let's say 150 teachers in just this region are planning to resign, how do we do it? How do we organize these schools?
And we knew this was coming. So this is one of those situations where, although it's been perhaps you know, speeded up by virtue of the pandemic and all of the concerns and worries that people have surrounding that, we knew that there was going to be an aging out. You know, what do they call it at the State Department of, you know, the state government calls it the silver tsunami, right? And so,
so you think it was just a matter of time, basically?
Yeah, yes, yeah, and it may be that it was accelerated a little bit by the pandemic, but clearly people were aging out of the profession, and that gives a lot of opportunity for young people like my students at Mitchell College who are preparing to become teachers, but young people all over the country, of course.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, that I realize it more and more every day that I'm interacting with educators, that to be an educator is definitely being a saint. It's
Wow.
You don't go into it necessarily, hey, you're gonna go make millions of dollars, and it's public service.
Right.
And so after a while, I'm sure you're exhausted, burnt out, and pandemic only exacerbated all that.
Well, it's interesting. I was part of the generation that made the switch before what was called the Teacher Enhancement Act in the 1980s. So before then, teachers were paid extremely low wages. So for instance, I was earning $14,000 a year, which even then wasn't that much, you know, but it was enough to have an apartment, and I was married at the time, and, you know, we could survive. But after the Teachers Enhancement Act, salaries started to go up so that they were akin to other professions, so that now teachers in Connecticut, after a number of years of service, you know, can make 80, 90, sometimes over $100,000 a year. That's not rich people's money, but that's a good salary.
You can live off that.
You can definitely live comfortably, and teachers deserve that. But we need, as a society, to see that teachers deserve it. But when that Enhancement Act went in and the wages went up, there was clearly an understanding that now the expectations are going up. So teaching isn't just like, oh, you know, I couldn't think of what else to do and I like kids, so I'll just be a teacher. No, now you're a professional that has very strict standards that you have to adhere to. And when I'm talking about standards, I don't mean just ethical standards, although yes, that, but even more so, knowledge of how the brain works, knowledge of how students at different ages can process information, knowledge of how to organize information so that different students in your class can access it from different points.
It's all different kinds of students.
All different kinds of students, exactly, right. So it's a higher standard now. It's one that I think Connecticut has been able to meet those challenges. But it's something that the average person outside of the profession oftentimes still thinks it's just sort of like hanging out with the kids and giving out some worksheets. That's not it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that too, that one of my best friends, he's an educator, and early on he was teaching Boston Public Schools, had a great time there, but he wanted to go abroad for a while and teach, so he was in Asia, And he said the emphasis on education there compared to America was night and day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wish that we could start to have more of that here. Of course, there's pockets of it, but maybe as a society we can emphasize a little bit more.
So it's interesting, the comparison with Asian countries, and of course Asian countries are so diverse among themselves, right? There's so many countries under that umbrella. But I have had the opportunity to visit at schools in Japan and also on multiple occasions in China. And I actually have had meetings with with some of the members of the National Education Ministry in China. And they were pretty frank. Probably wouldn't be as likely today that they would be as frank as they were then, but in any event, that they had some real problems in Chinese schools, like one that I wouldn't have expected, the dropout rate. Huge dropout rate, because a lot of people in country schools were dropping out to go to the cities to get work, right? And also the creativity issue that, that in many cases the Confucian emphasis on education is a good thing, but sometimes it results in a lot of rote learning. And as a result, you get the degree, but you might not have had the deep learning. Now, with that said, there are many people in every Asian country and every country on the planet, but let's talk about Asia for a second, that are fabulously creative and doing things that are going to change the world for the better. So with that as a given, I just think that we can benefit each other, because the Chinese officials, when I was meeting with them, said that they were very interested in ideas of having students become kind of entrepreneurs and invent things and that sort of thing. So I think a balance is oftentimes the best approach.
And again, it's a great example of kind of this problem potentially that we realize, and maybe here locally it could be a solution that year after year, all the time in the newspapers, it's these budget issues, never enough money for schools. But if we have students from maybe Brazil or Asia coming and spending $20,000, $30,000 a year for tuition, potentially that could help.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it does get back to mindset, which you alluded to earlier. In China, when you talk to school officials and even talk to students, they are building the future. That's how they say it. I'm not just a ninth grader. I'm part of building the future. This is a project. But I came back to the United States and I had the bus drivers wanted to go out on strike. And now, again, I'm not in any way putting down bus drivers or saying that their demands weren't necessarily unreasonable. I mean, they were looking for a better situation. But that there's a time and a place for this kind of thing. And parents coming out and saying, I don't want to pay one more penny in taxes. I get that, but are we going to build the future or not? And that doesn't seem to be a question that is easily answered in the United States right now. Are we going to build better highways or not? Are we going to build better schools with clean air in them and opportunities for students to really grow and excel, or aren't we?
Or aren't we? Yeah. And with everything in the news now, of course, here we're focused locally, but we have the global mindset, as you alluded to, and I try and emphasize that with my students too. Is that, hey, let's be proud Americans. Let's be proud people here. And look what students are doing in South America or Central America or Europe. And they're working hard. They're studying very hard because they want to work harder than we do.
Yeah, I think that I like the way you framed it as a global imperative, because really we are all sharing this planet together and we need to think of it that way. The global impact of certain decisions in some countries regarding the use of fossil fuels, for instance, and coal being a key one. It impacts every human, because it doesn't just stay where you live. It impacts the world. So we need to make better decisions. We need to educate our children so that they can see what the implications of what we're doing now are, and then make some better decisions. And that has nothing to do with political party or anything like that. It has to do with do we want clean water? I think the answer would be yes. Do we want to breathe clean air? I think the answer is yes. And then we can have time to argue about taxes and regulations and all of that.
And maybe some of that goes back to the mindset too.
Yes.
That if we are really supporting these people in the right way, we should be able to have these things that are the basic necessities. That you hear about stuff in schools where the water is full of lead and things.
Right.
This is America. How is that even possible?
Yeah, and it's sadly the case around the country, and certainly if you go to some of the states where education is not as valued as it is in Connecticut, it's incredible. I mean, not enough books for the students, not enough, there's sometimes no Wi-Fi available. I mean, these are things that are part of the world that they live in and will be living in, and these are tools that they need to have access to.
Mm-hmm. And one thing with the pandemic, it's brought to light a lot of health issues.
Yes.
And last few weeks, a lot of politicians here locally in Connecticut have talked about mental health in schools.
Yes.
And have you thought of any creative potential solutions or ideas that you're pondering along those lines?
Well, there's certainly a very strong movement regarding SEL, or social emotional learning.
Which has been around for a while.
It has been, yeah. And Mark Brackett, who is at Yale University, is one of the leading thinkers on SEL, or social emotional learning. Interestingly enough, there are parent groups now reacting to that, demanding that we don't have social emotional learning, that we should just focus on math and science and reading. But the whole child is the person that's actually learning those things, and they have emotions, as all humans do. And if you're frightened or unsure of yourself, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're not feeling safe psychologically, you're not going to relax and listen to some new ways of thinking about things, or reading a book about another country that you've never heard of. But if you were in a better mindset, you might find that to be interesting, and it might lead you to some conclusions that help your own life to become better and richer, but also help the community and the country and the world. So social emotional learning has to be understood to be part of what we do. Now, good teachers have always done that. Good teachers have always done things like had a morning meeting with young students. I mean, that's a form of social emotional learning. Just, greeting the students by name and having the students be able to share a little bit each morning as part of the routine. Kids, like adults, like routines. And so building in routines that recognize the children by name and by personality, and then go a step further and say, look, we know that this is essential to your learning, so we want you to be able to think about and share your emotions. And again, it doesn't have to take up the whole day. If you come up with a routine, then kids feel like they're belonging to something, and that sense of belonging is so necessary.
Belonging and also being heard. I think you raised a really great point along those lines. And for instance, that student that maybe doesn't feel super safe, and maybe they're in 8th grade at the middle school, and they keep running out of class, they're not doing work.
Right.
How would you say we get this student who's literally doing almost nothing all day to start doing something? That's a huge gap, isn't it?
It is. And so, that's where, and there is a requirement for having some professionals, trained professionals, work with students that are in that situation. So, people with a background in psychology, which is not my background, can intervene and support that student. But
you've
also
done a lot with education,
absolutely,
psychology.
100%, yeah. And the reality is that, that student that you referenced, running out of the room, setting up a situation where that person can be listened to and talked to and get a sense of what they are interested in, because kids are interested in things, and then through that finding ways to get them back into the mode of learning things that they're not interested in necessarily, because you can't only learn about what you're interested in. Sometimes you do have to learn, you have to learn how chemistry works, whether you're interested in that or not.
Even as painful as it might be, you
yes.
still need to learn it, right?
Yes.
And sad to highlight this, not super locally, but just the other day in Iowa, there's another violent act in schools. And of course, here locally, we had Sandy Hook.
Yes.
And I'm curious your thoughts. That it seems like almost year after year, month after month, we continue to have this pressing issue. And I'm not sure what the reason is that we can't find a better solution.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, I understand Second Amendment rights, and certainly it's not even possible to think about having people turn in their guns or anything like that. That's not going to happen. But we can do it in a way that prevents people, or at least reduces the access that people who have serious illnesses have, because obviously someone is ill if they go into a school and start shooting children. And so, yeah, it's very difficult, especially with the advent of these untraceable plastic guns. It even becomes more of an issue of, it's not about the guns, it's about how we organize society so that schools aren't natural targets, because that's been a problem.
Schools and teachers, yeah. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so to kind of shift topics a little bit here is that I understand that you recently started a school construction company called Braver Angels.
So it's not a school construction
Oh,
company.
okay.
It's so braverangels.org is a national organization,
Yep.
and it comes out of a variation of the famous quote from Lincoln about listening to our better angels. The organization had originally been conceived of as Better Angels, but that was taken by another copyrighted company.
And what's the premise of Braver Angels?
So it's the idea that we need, as a country, to be less divided. We need to be able to talk to each other about issues like how we're going to fund education, or fund transportation, or fund elder care. You know, there's lots of things, or fund infrastructure so that clean water is a natural right for people, not a specialty thing. So it brings people together. It typically organizes into blues, meaning more liberal or Democrat oriented, and reds, more conservative, more Republican oriented. But we recognize that many people might have a mixture of those things depending on their viewpoints. And we bring them together on a voluntary basis, and we've had a lot of success in all 50 states. In Connecticut, I'm the co-chair of the organization. I'm the blue guy, but it's organized so that there's two co-chairs, one who's more conservative, one who's less conservative.
With the whole goal to kind of spark that conversation.
Yeah. And we bring people together. We've had events on social media. We've had events on critical race theory. We're working. Just last night, we did an event with Connecticut, Central Connecticut State University, with a group of writing students. We've done some stuff with Fairfield University. We have had a number of events in the state, and we're going to have more. And we certainly, I personally would encourage people to check it out online, braverangels.org. See what it is. See if you're interested. There's lots of materials to look at. It's a nonprofit organization. I'm a volunteer. I don't make a penny from being involved in Braver Angels, but it's a way for me to give back a little bit and do some small thing to try and bring people together so we don't just yell at each other and call each other names.
Yeah, and it can go above and beyond just education, be a variety of
absolutely. It's about
topic.
Any topic. Yeah. Taxes, Second Amendment rights, the history of our country, how it should be taught. That's education, of course, but I mean, it's
anything and everything.
Anything and everything is right, yes.
Okay. And what are you seeing the reaction to this?
It's growing very quickly in Connecticut. We've been asked, we've had now different community organizations call us to say, we're having some trouble in our community. There are people that come to meetings and yell at each other and swear at each other. We need some help in organizing a situation where people can talk to each other, and they call us to come in and advise them and sometimes run workshops for them. So I'm very pleased that with our growth, it shows that there's a need for it.
A need, yeah, and just to your point, kind of trying to depolarize our country and our communities right now. There's a lot of these people serving on Board of Education or educators, and they get attacked after meetings, and these people are volunteers sometimes.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
Yes, exactly right. So, it's not going to solve every problem, but it's a way to refocus on the way democracy works, is that people can talk to each other. We can disagree even. That's okay. And we might have disagreements about business regulations or how taxes work or all of those things. That's fine. We even argue about them, but we don't need to demonize each other in the process.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and hopefully we respect one another.
Exactly.
Awesome. So once more, how do we find out more about that?
Braverangels.org. And you'll see it right away. There's all kinds of resources there, a YouTube channel. You can see examples of the different workshops that Braver Angels runs, debates, workshops, other things. I highly recommend people check into it. And then CT Braver Angels is the Connecticut version.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Clouet, thank you so much for being a guest on our show today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Steele. Appreciate it.